Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley, and I am a machine learning program manager at Google.
And I'm Lawrence, and I'm a machine learning developer advocate at Google.
And we are both people of AI.
So join us as we meet some of the most interesting people in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
You will meet leaders, practitioners, amateurs in the field of AI and ML, and how they ended up where they are today, what they have learned along the way, and their outlook on the future.
Sounds exciting. Shall we do it?
Let's jump right in. This podcast is sponsored by Google. Any remarks made by the speakers are their own and are not endorsed by Google. We are excited today to welcome Sharon Zhou. Sharon is currently an adjunct faculty member at Stanford University, where she defended her PhD in an impressive 3.5 years on generative AI models advised by Andrew Ng. She is also the co-founder of Stealth Startup, working on democratizing access and ease of use of AI by making it easier to program and customize large language models. She has a passion for teaching AI and is currently teaching 80,000 students about GANs, diffusion models, and more on Coursera, and was an AI advisor to key AI policymakers in D.C. Fun facts about Sharon. She was the first to major in classics and computer science at Harvard University and is featured in MIT Technology Review's 35 Under 35. To top that, she's also a poet. Welcome to the People of AI podcast, Sharon. We're so excited to have you.
Welcome, Sharon. I feel smarter just being in the same room.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you for having me.
We would love to get to know you a little bit. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I think one surprising thing that might explain my life trajectory has been a really adventurous childhood. I really admire my mom, actually. She would take me on these crazy adventures. For example, once she asked me who my favorite Disney princess was, and oftentimes I have my hair in braids, and so I would say Pocahontas because I loved how adventurous she was. And once my mom actually said, wouldn't it be cool if we lived with Native Americans? And I said yes, but then she started to Google friendliest Native American tribe. The Blackfeet tribe comes up and she Googles Blackfeet tribe, and the first phone number she sees, she calls, and we actually go stay with them in Browning, Montana.
Oh, wow.
Just on a complete whim. Yes.
For how long?
For several months with a guy named Bear Chief. So my dad was not too psyched about this, but it did happen.
Oh my, that must be quite the experience.
It was quite the experience. That's pretty much the mantra my mom raised me with, of just like choose something adventurous and wild and different. And that actually led me to studying classics, which I found by saying, I love languages. I just want to study another language. And she said, what's the weirdest language your school offers? And I looked at the list and I was like, Latin, because it's a dead language. And it led me there. And I love Latin. I love classics. And what I love most is honestly how it really got me thinking about leaving a legacy in the world, and the kind of legacy I want to be able to leave, and maybe, just maybe, stand the test of time, of millennia for people. And so that's ultimately what got me into computer science and building things for people.
The great thing about knowing Latin as well is that you can translate all the Harry Potter spells.
Very useful, actually, because if you
Really?
translate them right, you actually can cast the spells.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And you've been working magic since then, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In weird, surreptitious ways.
I guess it makes sense that you're also studying large language models. Do you think that there's a connection there? It's very language themed.
Oh, yes. I love languages. I kind of view most things I do as a translation problem. Most things are just translating any kind of communication, even if it's between two people who speak the same language. We often have different languages because we're, maybe an expert in AI or not an expert in AI, an expert in, medicine or something. Everything is just translation.
Wow.
I'm seeing a theme here.
A little bit.
You do a lot of translating in terms of your teaching too. So you talked about how, you have all of this incredible wealth of knowledge and all of the things that you've studied and that you're doing, but you also create this connecting bridge to bring folks on your journey as well. And I'd love for you to maybe say a little bit more about that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I really believe in making complex technology much more accessible. because I, for one, actually didn't grow up very technical. I was studying Latin and ancient Greek literature, and the user experience class really changed the trajectory of my life. The professor said first thing, it's never the user's fault. And I just sat there thinking, oh my God, it's never been my fault for breaking all this stuff, for thinking I'm pretty much an Apple QA. I just sat there baffled and realized, maybe it's the person designing the technology's fault. And I was like, wait, no, what if I could be that person and help shape how things are designed so no one feels intimidated by technology like I was? And so that really has pushed me towards teaching. I think it's a huge thing of just making it accessible. Why use all this jargon when you can make it much more accessible and engaging and grounded in the language that the person already knows? That's kind of my motivation for a lot of that. Is I was intimidated. I felt stupid. And so I don't think anyone else should.
Wow. You touched on something there that's really interesting, because what you teach is very advanced things like generative adversarial networks and stable diffusion and that kind of thing. So it's like, has that been a deliberate choice to kind of choose the most advanced things and to try to simplify those?
Yes, definitely. I think the most advanced things, and I also admit the things that I feel like have a little bit of magic to them, because they both captured my interest, and I think what they do capture a lot of people's interest, especially now as they've really taken steam. And I kind of want to break it down and tell people, like, one, it's maybe not all that, magical in terms of how to get it working, but you can also wield the magic too. Maybe I can give everyone the wands or something like that.
I just want the ASIO spell that I can say ASIO sunglasses and it just comes to me. If you can figure out how to develop a magic wand where I just call for things that can just come to me without me having to move, they'll be my new favorite person.
Stable diffusion's kind of that, but it's an image of sunglasses.
I'd love for you to actually go more into that. While we're on this theme of ASIO image, let's hear a little bit more about stable diffusion.
Yeah, so stable diffusion really took the world by storm as this model that is able to generate beautiful pictures. And that wasn't super new to AI before, but I think what's really special is that now we can control what we're generating, what the model's generating, what beautiful images it's painting through words, through language, and through just, putting together a weird sentence of different words. So like a teddy bear doing a science experiment or something like that, which maybe doesn't exist on the internet anywhere, but you could actually ask the model to start generating. And in this way, it's democratizing being an artist. It enables everyone to kind of think very creatively and see their creations come to life. And I think it's really magical.
I mean, I love how it's widened access to being able to create images, because I can't draw to save my life. But when I start trying to come up with things in decent prompts, or I look at hints for prompts that people have put on the internet, like say octane render or something like that, suddenly I'm creating beautiful images, and it's mind blowing. I'm curious, Sharon, at your experience, with teaching so many people generative stuff, that the more I see it's catching wildfire, the more I also see ignorance about it kind of taking sway. Stable diffusion, people saying that, it's a model that contains billions of compressed images, and then it's just creating a collage of those compressed images, and, and then all of the copyright issues and legal issues that come with that. But that's not how diffusion works. And I'm curious, what has your experience been with that? And how would you do the magic of really translating the truth into people who misunderstand?
I think it's really important to start to distill some of these concepts and really explain some of these concepts in very simple terms. And I don't think there's anything out there like that yet. I remember when talking to policymakers, I actually brought it all the way down to the level of the hardest words I used were multiplication and addition. And I basically was explaining that that's what a neural network ultimately is. And at the end of it, I remember several of them coming up to me being like, I've sat through so many training sessions of what is AI, what is machine learning, what are neural networks? And they were like, this was the only thing that made sense. And I think it's really about constraining our own vocabulary and how we describe these models, and also thinking from their perspective, what actually matters to them in terms of understanding this. And I agree. I don't think there's much out there to explain these models at the exact level of depth they need to understand them. Because I think there's like the level of pop science articles where they have this like brain and like robot, and I'm like, what is going on? What is happening right now? To like, here's the math in the paper. And I think there are some blog posts in between, but it really, there are gaps in accessibly understanding what's going on with these models.
Yeah, I think it's, that's one of the things that there's just a great opportunity for us to be able to help, educate the market so that, it's like, I mean, nothing is perfect and no model is perfect. But I think if we're going to question something, or if we're going to be afraid of it, then at least we should at least understand how it works and, not act in ignorance. And I think you touched on something about the language that we use to describe it, that we often fall into using language that makes it
jargony.
Yeah. I mean, like I scared the life out of somebody once when I was showing them how like a stable diffusion works. And I was saying, yes, now here's how the computer is dreaming up the image. And they went, it can dream? I was like, oh,
crap. REM cycles.
Yeah. Rewind. That's not really dreaming. And it's like, and I think it's one of the things like as an industry, like you alluded to earlier on, which is something was, the way you said it was really beautiful. So everything is a translation problem. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like we have to realize that how we communicate something, we should be thinking about translating it. And that's what I love about the work that you've been doing and the GAN work and that kind of stuff, was that you're making it simple, you're making it approachable, and you're making it explainable.
I think it's important. And I actually really appreciate seeing written things even from the quote other side, because I know some people are quote misrepresenting the models, but it actually shows us, the practitioners and the researchers and the developers, how people actually perceive it. Mm-hmm. And how people actually are trying to understand these models and what the gap actually is. And it puts it down on paper in language specifically. And I think that's really illuminating.
I have noticed that gap too, which I think one of the reasons why we're having this podcast is to try to really bridge that gap and close that gap and try to find ways to not only explain the technology, but get people excited about its potential as well. And that it is not as scary as people think it is, or it doesn't fit the stereotype. I'd love to know a bit more about sort of your journey in between and how and what you see as the evolution of the technology, and then what gets you excited or what kept you going along the way. And the last kind of question I'll insert in there is, was AI something that sort of grew on you, or were you like, oh, I had one taste and I'm like, I want to keep going and this is exactly what I want to do?
Yeah, it's not a very direct path. So after taking those computer science classes, after college, I really wanted to start a company. And the advice I got from a mentor was do product management for a couple of years and then start a company. You'll learn a lot, from product management, especially at a startup, enough to get your own off the ground. And I really enjoyed product management. That was like the job I enjoyed the most. I tried a bunch of jobs every semester in college, and that was the one that really just clicked with me and in my skills. And it was about explaining accessible concepts, translating between very different roles. And I also really love time management, which I think is kind of weird, but I love it. So I love product management, did that initially, and then 2 years came up and got into Y Combinator, which is an accelerator in the Valley to help people start companies. And I realized I just didn't care about the company I was building at all. And it just got me reflecting, what am I doing? What company do I want to start? Why am I in this anyways? And I think that was a very important moment, because I concluded that, I don't want to build just like some random company. I want to build a technologically transformative company like Google. And then this is literal, okay? I was like, literally Google, interesting. What did Larry and Sergey do? They dropped out of the Stanford PhD. So that was actually my plan. I was like, I'm going to drop out of the Stanford PhD. And the first day I talked to Andrew when we first met, I actually told him that. I told him I'm going to drop out. Like, I was this PhD student. And he was like, okay. And
was this in the process of launching your company, or is this after?
No, I decided not to go launch the company, and I decided to do the PhD program. During the PhD program, I consult at different companies, startups, AI startups, and I actually started an accelerator of my own to get more people to start companies. And I got about, I think, 70 people to quit their jobs and start companies.
Wow.
And I was just like really thinking about that, really trying to find, either my Sergey or my Larry at Stanford, quite frankly. And I guess the joke is that I failed to drop out. Really, I failed twice because I was also trying to do that at Harvard. I was not good at that. But it was because I was really mesmerized by generative models. And I didn't think I would really fall in love with technology. Quite frankly, when I first saw AI, I was at Google PM. I was sitting in on Fei-Fei's meetings, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, this AI model can detect a cat from a dog, but like, I can too, so who cares? Like, I'm not impressed. Give me something impressive. And actually, what impressed me was these generative models, because I was like, well, I remember that this thing can paint. Like, I can't do this. So I was really impressed and mesmerized, and I've always loved like the feeling of magic. I've always loved Disney growing up. I know that sounds a little cheesy. So I mean, that's what kept me going. And obviously I accelerated the process a bit of graduating. So effectively dropped out, I think. And now have started a company, and it really is all that I want it to be. I'm making it more accessible for more people to play and work with and customize their own generative models. So very, very excited about that.
Curious about your thoughts about where generative models are going. I mean, because the potential, the sky is, it's amazing, but there are headwinds. And I'm just curious about how you'd navigate those headwinds, what you're thinking about, and, where you see the success being.
Yeah. So I think on the research front, I think people are really pushing for AGI and like this really broad general model that could do a lot of different tasks. I'm actually really excited about the concrete tasks that these models can actually do at a smaller scale that are really customized to people's needs. Instead of dreaming of a future, which I know a lot of AI researchers think about, dreaming of a future of like an AI super race that like goes beyond humans. I'm honestly really excited about getting this so accessible that this is like the next generation of computing. And if we can get it to be accessible, then we can enable diverse communities to actually be working on it, using them, and solving their own problems. Like, I'm really excited about getting just very different people who see their own problems, understand their own problems, can spec out their own problems with requirements. Maybe not exactly that, but like could do that and solve their own problems with this model that can start to write code, build software, and do a lot of these different tasks that otherwise required huge teams to do. So I'm excited about that future where it really becomes a tool that powers the next generation of how we build software at all.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the exciting things you touched on that is particularly passionate is giving people the ability to scale beyond themselves. Right.
Yes.
So like we spoke about it with art. People who can't draw can now draw beautiful things and maybe turn that into a business. And you're talking here about widening access in general to people to maybe skills that weren't available to them prior, or they had a little bit of skill in it, but they can scale that into something that can be successful.
Previously, when I was younger, I wanted to be a counselor. Like, I really wanted to be like a career coach for people because I love listening to people when they're at an inflection point in their lives. Basically, I love when people are faced with an existential crisis and helping them get through it. I love that. But I realized that the only way to scale myself was through technology. And through any impact I wanted had to be through technology to get past just a few people that I would otherwise engage with.
Can you share more about that? I'm curious as to why technology.
Oh, yeah. Well, I saw that technology just enabled scale at an unprecedented number. Like, I don't think I can talk to 1 million people in my lifetime. maybe. We'll see. I'm very gregarious and extroverted at times, so maybe. But yeah, I don't think I could do that all at once. I remember at Google, it's like, a billion, can't count that low. And it's just a completely different scale at what like one person can do. And if one person can move a lever further, I just find that very, very interesting in terms of impact on the world.
Wow.
That's beautiful. In your love of discovering generative AI, was there ever a point where you were like, oh, what am I doing? Because I think a lot of folks that sometimes go into the industry end up with this feeling of like, oh, there's so many more people around me that are smarter than me, or this is so much more complicated than I'm able to understand. So they're either intimidated about getting into the field or even continuing because it does feel so broad. It does feel so big. So have you ever had some of those moments? And you can now put your coaching hat on if you could give some advice.
Oh, yes, all the time. Actually, my entire PhD was marred with the thought of why haven't I dropped out yet? I'm serious, like, why am I still here? So it's like one giant existential crisis that was drawn out, especially since I came from product and I could tell I was affecting no end users. And that was very uncomfortable for me because I think I derive happiness from affecting some end user and like seeing someone be happy. Like, for example, if I were to, counsel someone or career coach someone, I would see them be inspired and like move towards something. So for that, I very much, worked on getting groups of students. But throughout my career, I feel like I've had a lot of imposter syndrome. Actually, a huge reason why I even got more technical in terms of getting technical superpowers was I always felt like I just wasn't technical enough. And people would tell me, you're not technical enough, or wouldn't believe me when I was technical. And the thing that I thought was honestly quite hilarious after my PhD was, as I was raising money for my company, people were like, oh, you're too technical. I was like, yeah, no. It was funny because before my PhD, people were like, maybe you should just do the business side. You seem to be good at thinking about that. And then afterwards, they're like, are you sure you can handle the business side? I was like, oh my God, at this point, I can't even. So I think seeing that, both sides, now I'm like, I don't really care what you think because this is hilarious. But before that, I can totally see how it's intimidating because it's, ambiguous and there's a lot of uncertainty on where things go. I definitely felt like I really had to prove myself technically to myself, actually. So one of my papers got very technical, or like technical and from some definition of technical. It was pretty math heavy, like pure mathematics type thing. And a lot of machine learning people didn't even understand it, but like a lot of math PhDs did. So that was cool.
You're like, hey, I showed you.
Yeah. Or like for me, I was like, oh, I'm here. I got here. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. It was beautiful. Like I do really love math, but I'm done. I don't need to do more of this for myself. And now I can actually confidently compare things that are viewed as technical and non-technical and say like, actually that non-technical thing was actually quite hard to the technical people, who don't believe that. I guess one thing to add on the imposter syndrome piece, I used to think it was really negative that I had imposter syndrome. I used to think, wow, why am I so insecure about my technical ability? But I actually used it to motivate me now. I remember having this conversation with someone being like, wow, this actually got you this far, though. And it just made me reflect, you're right. This is great. And maybe this could be part of my superpower toolkit, So I actually use it to motivate me now. So whenever I think about it, I actually think about it fondly and positively. And I think that's almost like a different and unique perspective on the same thing.
That's a really wonderful way of looking at it, because when you think about it, if you're not having imposter syndrome, you're probably not paying attention, right? Or you could be conceited and think you're better than everybody else, or you're not growing. So it's a really, really lovely way to look at it.
But what's that? Like, there's that point, right, where you're like, there's a very fine point where you can either make that decision, right, of like, oh, I feel crappy and I have imposter syndrome. And there's that moment where you're like, let me work at it versus let me move on to something else or let me give up, right? And I think what's beautiful is that you, on a consistent basis, are like, oh, I feel sticky and icky and I've got this imposter syndrome and I'm not good at this. So let me get even better at it, as opposed to being like, maybe that's not my thing. Maybe that's not what I'm meant to be doing. Let me go and find something that I am good at and then pursue that more. You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah, I often find the things that I'm not perceived to be good at and be like, no, I'm going to be good at this. And I think it's just, I think overall motivated by proving people wrong, for better or for worse.
I was about to say, I wonder if there's like some confidence there, like some underlying confidence that like I can do things, right? And I'm able to, like, even I love the story about your mom, right? Who was like, who basically enabled you to have this completely crazy idea and this completely crazy dream and make it not crazy and make it something actually plausible. I think this ability to realize that the impossible can be made possible, I wonder if that is also sort of a beautiful part of what enables you to be like, you know what, I feel a certain way, or this, I feel imposter syndrome, but I'm actually, because I have that confidence and proof of the past things that I was able to achieve, I can actually move forward with that. Would you say that's true?
I definitely think looking at past examples and reminding yourself of, oh, wait, I was brave this one time, or I overcame that one time, can be really just energizing. And yeah, I agree. My mom's adventures kind of opened up my eyes to anything that's outside of the box. And you can ask, you can try. You might get rejected a bunch, but you can try. And actually got me really into, I was really shy growing up, but I kind of forced myself out of my shell because I saw how she was able to make everyone around her so happy, so happy, even if she didn't speak the same language. And she was able to just do things so spontaneously, and that made people so happy. And so I was so determined to become like that. And I think part of that was just being like, okay, well, now I'm just going to get really uncomfortable. I'm just going to cold call 1,000 people, and all 1,000 people are going to reject me, and it's fine. And maybe one doesn't. And I cold called Andrew Ng to be my advisor, for example. And I just cold call, a lot of the things I've gone in my life have been cold calls. I think as I've gotten older, like maybe more things can come through the door, but I still think a lot of things feel like reaches. And you can still reach for it. Just reach for it. It's an adventure, right? So, yeah.
Very much similar to AI's journey, too. It's like it moves forward and then it hits a wall, and then all of a sudden it keeps going, and researchers, and product managers and developers keep at it, and then makes a huge leap. So it's I love the full circleness of it. So I did want to close with two questions. So I'll ask the first. What is next for you, Sharon?
What is next? Well, it's running this company and launching it. We're getting close to that. We're working with a bunch of customers, so it's exciting. That's really making generative models much more accessible. And I also love how I get to work with a great team of people and also get to have some say in that team of people and the culture that we create. So I'm having the time of my life doing that. So very happy about that. Yes.
Awesome.
Wow.
Lawrence, did you have anything else before I ask my final question?
No, go for it.
All right. What is your favorite AI movie?
I guess the two that come to mind are Her and Steven Spielberg's Artificial Intelligence, the OG movie. For both, I thought there was kind of an interesting emotional aspect to it, and I really enjoyed that.
Well, it's a beautiful interpretation of AI and sort of at its core what it is, from a technological perspective as well as like an emotional one too. Thank you so much, Sharon, for being on the podcast and for your time. It was such a pleasure getting to know you, and your wealth of knowledge and experience is really such an honor.
It's just a joy to spend time with Sharon anytime, but to actually capture that in a podcast like this, and it's so inspirational. It's like amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.